following Chalk Talk is brought to you by Isolite, the emergency lighting experts. Stay educated, my friends.
Learning never exhausts the mind. That quote by Leonardo da Vinci, I think, is really applicable for us in two ways today. First and foremost, we are really excited to be launching our second round of our training camp leadership series next month. We're really excited to have Mickey Williams join us, who's just a phenomenal speaker, professional coach, and she's going to be focusing on storytelling as it relates to selling. I'd really encourage all of you to be there. And then secondly, specifically today, our Chalk Talk, focusing on installation and mounting and some things to consider in applications. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm Matt Bird, Eastern Regional Manager, along with Greg Keel, Western Regional Sales Manager. And as you know, Evan Ackman is our Director of Product Development, who will be running the show for us today. So Evan, please take it away, sir.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thank you for that great introduction. And thank you all for being here today. As Matt mentioned, we're going to be talking about mounting and installation today. We'll start with an overview and some background, particularly as it relates to some recent changes we made to mounting nomenclature. We'll go over to a full decoder ring of exactly how to read all of the mounting options that we have. We'll talk a little bit about universal mounting and why we changed away from that type of nomenclature. We'll show examples of all of the different mounting types, and then we'll end with a couple one-offs and notes, and then some information about how you get in contact with us should you want to go through more of this. The first and maybe the most obvious question is, why talk about this at all? The obvious answer is, of course, because every product needs mounted in some way. And there's someone born every day who has not spec'd an emergency lighting system. So we should be cognizant of the fact that there are people at different parts of their career. But more than that, I think that there's been some confusion historically on mounting, and it's complicated. Different vendors use different nomenclature, sometimes to mean the same things. We've been guilty of that historically. Sometimes we combine mounting options. That's the universal thing. Sometimes we don't for particular reasons. And this mostly confronts us when we're dealing with exit signs, but there are a couple things that we've tried to amend and make more simple for emergency lights as well. They tend to have fewer options when it comes to mounting, but there are some key differences, and the nomenclature reflects that. And the nomenclature is really what this conversation is all about. Last year, or maybe just almost 2 years ago, we changed all of our nomenclature to try to make it consistent across the product line, to make it easier to deal with for you guys who are specifying and designing systems. That was late 2019, early 2020. And more recently, in the last month, we've released a price book as well that went into effect February 8th. The goal of that was to try to bring consistency to the nomenclature. And there were a lot of questions immediately following that about what we were doing, what some of the things meant. That's mostly died down, but it hasn't gone away completely. And so in the most recent price book, we've actually tried to add more clarification, clear more things up. Particularly that surrounds mullion mounting, but there's some other things that we've tried to make a little bit more simple as well, just to make it very clear what the right product is for the applications that you're going to be in. And we'll show you those examples here in a couple slides. The decoder ring, I think, is important. This is what you're going to see in, I think, almost every product we have that has any sort of configurable mounting options, and even some that don't. Everything begins with an M, and then you're going to find one or multiple of the second column here, TEBP for top, end, back, pendant, RC for recessed ceiling, RW for recessed wall, MM for mullion mount. In some of those options, there are downstream decisions that you have to make. For example, if you're selecting a pendant, if it's blank following that, that means that the product is pendant capable, or you might be in a position where you're going to select the actual length of the pendant we would include with the product. In addition to that, in some instances, you may not have a color option because it's just going to match the housing, but in some instances, you actually will have some flexibility to change to a white, black, or brushed aluminum finish, and that will follow that. So you can read this decoder ring and sort of understand how the model numbers go together. But I think maybe the most important thing is actually in the note at the bottom. If you compare our model numbers, how they are now versus how they were previous to that late 2019 nomenclature change, or even to our competitors' nomenclature, you're going to see that we don't use U for universal mounting. And that's very intentional. We've taken the tact that we want to be a lot more explicit on exactly what we mean when we say universal, because we had universal products that weren't truly universal. And so what you'll see now is, some combination of M, T, E, B, P. That's sort of the perfect universal, but in some instances, you'll see only MTB or MTEB, or you won't see the P in some instances. The idea there is that it positively acknowledges which of the mounting options it's capable of doing. Just putting a U there and saying it's universal doesn't actually capture what the complexity is of the mounting. And so the idea is to make it more simple and straightforward so that there's no chance of mistake. I'd like to go through examples of all the mounting types just to sort of give you a refresher of exactly what they are and where they go, and a couple notes about each and every one. So I have the fictitious Isolite lobby here. That's actually not our office. And I sort of want to just take us through a very simplified version of this and show you in this location where all the exit signs would go and what type of mounting they would use in each of those applications. So leading right into it, we start with top. And we'll start right with some confusion, because in previous nomenclature and some of our competitors would actually call this a ceiling mount. And we intentionally don't call it a ceiling mount because we want to refer to the product and itself and where it's mounted. So this is mounted to the top of the unit. The reason for that distinction is because it can mislead you on emergency lights. You can mount an emergency light to the ceiling from its back and still have it operate in the exact same way. Calling it a ceiling mount wouldn't be appropriate because that would drive towards inconsistency. One other thing to keep in mind is that when you hit top, sometimes you're going to get a canopy with it. What we have in these examples is an ELT, so it doesn't have a canopy. It has sort of an all-in-one housing that you mount to. But keep in mind, sometimes when you get a top, you're going to get a canopy to hide the junction box and the rough-in associated with those products. The next up on the hit parade here is the end mount, sometimes called flag mounting. This is if you have an opportunity like this where people are going to be egressing along a wall, but they have to go perpendicular to the wall to get out of the building. This is over the elevator lobby here in this instance. One thing to note about these, in addition to the fact that sometimes it's called flag mount colloquially, is generally speaking, it doesn't have a direction associated with it. None of our products right now require you to specify right or left, but I won't promise that that will always be the case. We have no plan to change that, but we have provisions in the nomenclature to say whether the chevron would be right or left, depending on the application. Similar to top, we have the mount back. And again, some of our competitors and even us historically would sometimes call this wall mounting. But again, we want to refer to where it mounts on the product. So again, you can see the ELT with its housing mounted on the back. This is really where you would start to see the emergency lights come in. Most emergency lights have MB as their mounting call out. That doesn't mean that they can't mount to the ceiling. It means that they're meant to mount to the back of the product. It doesn't actually specify the type of installation or where it goes. So that's why we don't call it wall, we call it back. You'll actually see instances later where we do use the word wall because it's a little bit more appropriate. A popular one where we get a lot of questions is with pendant mounting. Remember from our decoder ring that sometimes it's just pendant capable. So if you see that P without anything following it, not one of those letters or the finished delegations, that means it's a bring your own conduit and nut kind of system. So you're going to have the pipe, you're going to use a conduit nut. That's how you're going to grab onto the thing. It's not something that we provide. If we are providing it, we have standard sizes of pendant material, whether it's a piece of square pipe or circular pipe. Our standard offering is 12 inches to 72 inches, although we do offer custom sizes longer than 72 inches, as well as the in-between sizes. So if you need 18 inches, we can certainly do that by designating MPCC for custom. And as I mentioned, sometimes there are finish options available with this. If that's not specified, there's either not an option or it's going to match the housing color. In some instances, like on the ELT, you can make an election of whether you want a black, white, or brushed aluminum pendant that actually holds it. So keep that in mind. And now we get into the more purposeful installation methodologies, the recessed ceiling. So this is in contrast to using the word top, because these have to go in the ceiling because of the type of product it is. That's why we don't call this top, we call it recessed ceiling. One thing that's consistent with all of the recessed products is they're going to require a dedicated back box that's custom. It's not a standard 1900 series box. For the ELT, it's a custom recessed ceiling box that it would be using. You can ship that with the product, or it can be pre-shipped with an option and then a separate line item. So recessed ceiling goes above it, but it mounts in a recessed way. Recessed wall, we've actually shifted gears here to move away from the ELT and over to the LPDC. We don't have a recessed wall version of the edgelet signs, only of the die cast signs. Again, same thing that we saw on top versus ceiling, you're gonna see here back versus wall. If we say recessed wall, it's intended to go on a wall, not a ceiling, because of the way that those back boxes are designed, because of the applications for the product itself. Same thing as we saw before, pre-shipped back boxes are available. And then we get into the fun ones, the mullion mounting. And there's a number of different mullion mounting options. Two of them are pretty simple, top and bottom. The thing that makes mullion mounting complicated is the position of the legend. So you can see on the right-hand side of your screen right now that in one instance, the legend is actually upside down. It has to be inverted. In this instance, it's not ambiguous, right? The top one is clearly the legend is oriented in the proper direction, and in the bottom mounting, because it's going to go on the sort of the top side of a mullion, we know that the legend has to be inverted. And so that's how we're going to ship that product. So mount top means that the legend is going to be normal. Mount bottom means that the legend is going to be inverted. These are basically the same as top mounting, but they have a little bit of different hardware that makes it appropriate for mullion mounting. Where there is ambiguity, and maybe the biggest change in our price book and spec sheets that you've seen over the last 6 weeks, is with the mullion mounting rear. And so if you look at the picture on the left-hand side here, these two products mount in the exact same way. There's no difference whether it's right side up or upside down. And just calling out mullion mount rear is ambiguous because we don't know exactly how it's going to be installed, and they're both equally likely. And so instead of having the option be mullion mount rear and then there be something in the option section all the way at the end of the product nomenclature, we've actually changed to be more specific about the mounting. So what we have now is mullion mount rear standard, indicating that the exit legend is going to be in the normal configuration like you see in the upper left, and MMR, mullion mount rear, inverted, which means that the exit legend is going to be inverted with the bottom of the word exit nearer to the housing. So you don't have to add additional nomenclature at the end. You just specify exactly how you're going to mount it. It's a little bit more literal and exact, and we think that it's going to reduce ordering errors, because this is one of the areas where we had lots of them, frankly. A couple one-offs to end here. I mentioned this as we were going through it, but the bug is of particular interest because with our nomenclature change, we actually saw a very drastic change in usage on parts, which means that there's confusion. Nothing would be incorrect in the field, but I want to call attention to it because there is a cost premium. So the bug, for example, has two options associated with it. It has MB, mount back, and MTB, mount top back. MB is the most common option, but we started to see MTB get selected when people want to actually mount it to the ceiling. When you order MTB, you're going to get a canopy, and we charge a little bit of extra money for it. I think it's like, $5 or $7 or something, but you don't actually need it. In most scenarios, even if it's going to be mounted to the ceiling, you just mount the back of the product up to the junction box that's on the ceiling, and you don't need that canopy. That's the reason why we've elected to call out it's back mounted, it's not wall mounted. So keep that in mind. If you're selecting MTB as an option when you're ordering a bug, keep in mind that you got to think, do I actually need the canopy, and do I actually want these lights to be pointed parallel to the ceiling, or do I want it to be blasting straight down? 90% of the time, MB is going to be the right thing to do. Also, as I mentioned, keep in mind that recessed products are always going to need the back box that's designed for them. You saw in the decoder ring that all of them have an LB suffix that can be added. So MRC versus MRC LB. That LB means less back box. If you're going to order that at some other point, either on the same order or on a previous order, you will have had to order the back box by itself so that you have a thing to install it. They always have to go together. There's no way to get around that. It's not a standard back box. Just keep that in mind. With that said, I know this is an overview and some refresher for a lot of people, but I think it's important to remind us of some of the basics. The spec sheets call this out in every instance. If that's not true, please let me know and we'll have it amended. If you ever need any assistance on this or anything else, my name is Evan Ackman. Greg and Matt are on this call. You guys do so much for us, and we appreciate everything you do. We're here to support you in any way that we can. If you want to talk more about mounting or anything else that we do, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us, and we will do whatever you need in order to be successful. Well, thank you all. Have a good day and a good week.